Welcome you to tonight's event, Conservative Feminisms. The Pomona Student Union is a nonpartisan, student-run organization committed to increasing the level of honest and open dialogue on campus and in the broader community. We aim to challenge assumptions and present a range of perspectives through speeches, discussions, and debates. By presenting speakers with varying perspectives, we strive to engage in critical thinking and promote intellectual diversity. In doing so, we hope to encourage further conversations and to push ourselves to ask difficult questions. The PSU does not endorse or support the viewpoints of any speakers at tonight's event, but we do encourage you to take this discussion further and challenge assumptions while discussing this topic with others. So moving on to our topic, conservative feminisms. American women, especially unmarried women, are a powerful voting bloc in the upcoming election. Debates over the future of Planned Parenthood and the GOP's inclusivity towards women are regular fixtures in the news cycles, and women politicians like Hillary Clinton, Carly Fiorina, Elizabeth Warren, and Sarah Palin are practically household names. While the realm of politics is still overwhelmingly male, women politicians are rising to the forefront of political discourse, and the possibility of a woman president is closer to reality than ever before. Here to discuss the difficult and complicated relationship of women in conservative political spaces are two speakers, Sherrie Gibson from American Conservatives of Color, and Sabrina Schaeffer, the director of the Independent Women's Forum. Please join me in welcoming these speakers. To start, if both speakers could just talk a little bit about your work in conservative political spaces. Sherrie, would you like to start?
So good evening. Can you all hear me okay? Good evening, everyone. My name is Sherrie Gibson, and I'd like to thank the PSU and for inviting us out here to speak to you all this evening. I am from Colorado Springs, and I'm glad to be back in California, originally born and raised here. So what I do, my husband and I were small business owners. I've been involved in the political scene for quite some time. I ran for county commissioner back in Colorado. And so I've just been in and out of politics and gotten a chance to really get involved with the presidential race and the governor's race in Colorado, and gotten to see different folks come through. So very glad to be here.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for coming out on a Tuesday night. I know there's a lot of demands on all of your time. And I'm from Southern California originally, about an hour and a half south of here. And it's funny because I have these sort of fond memories of Pomona. I couldn't really remember it, but my dad was an academic at one point, and he said there was only one bookstore in all of California that had a decent philosophy section. So he used to drag me in the car all the way up here to go to the bookstore. So all I remember about Pomona was the bookstore, philosophy section, and your smog, although today is a beautiful day, so it's nice to be back. I've been the executive director of IWF for about 4.5 years. I was a fellow with the organization before that. Sort of borderline obsessed with modern feminism since I was in college. My senior spring break, I was stuck in Vermont with a fever of 104. My mom sent me Wendy Showit's book, A Return to Modesty. So anyway, you can imagine how awesome that spring break was, but it really got me excited about issues related to women in politics and conservative feminism, and I've been sort of at it ever since. I think that we have at IWF, we sort of call ourselves modern feminists. We think about all that entails, and we're really focused on the choices that women and men can make so that we can all pursue the lives of happiness that we want. I think, unfortunately, a lot of my progressive feminist counterparts don't see life quite that way. They see sort of sexism lurking around every corner. You are probably well aware that you are going to face a massive gender gap or pay gap when you get out of here. There's all sorts of awful things that are about to happen to you. Society is tremendously hostile toward women. So we try to push back on some of those myths and get you excited about being grown-ups in the big world that we're all going into. And at IWF, our mission is to engage women regularly and to educate them on the virtue and value of limited government and on liberty. And we want women to be able to make the choices in healthcare and education in the marketplace and the workplace that make sense for themselves and their families. We spend a lot of time on the airwaves. Part of our thinking, and I suspect there's some political scientists in the making here tonight, part of our thinking is that when you engage, you actually disrupt people's thinking. It's not simply that you're able to give them new facts or new statistics. It's that you actually get people to go out in search of more information, and that's the way that you begin to change minds and change ideas. So in addition to broadcast media, we do academic grade research, we do policy papers, books, fact sheets, quizzes, storyboards, videos, social media. I hope that you'll visit our website, iwf.org, and you'll see sort of all of our commentary on a range of issues. And I should just add that one thing that sets IWF apart from other conservative women's groups is that we actually focus entirely on economic liberty and cultural trends. We do not take an official position on abortion or on gay marriage. There are plenty of women's groups that do that, but we don't feel like that is too often that is sort of the end of the conversation for women and for men, for that matter. It's not really very gendered. So we really focus on economic liberty.
All right, so our first question, how has your identity as a woman impacted your political ideology? And have you found intersections between feminism and your political beliefs?
Wow, so how's my ideology? Being a woman and being in politics has been an interesting go. And I think it's just, it really depends on where you are. And when I say that, I mean like geographically located, because being a woman in politics looks different in California than it does in Colorado. Very patriarchal where I came from, lots of power positions and lots of kind of old traditional things that people were involved in. So there wasn't a lot of space for women. There's not a lot of women candidates coming up. There's not a lot of grooming going on. So you really have to find your own way. It pushes you to be able to look out and see what feminism looks like for a conservative woman and what that looks like sort of being surrounded by a pool of men and really not having that person to go to and say, hey, you know, what did you experience when you were running? There's just not a lot of women who are in politics and involved in politics where I live, so not having that group of women to reach back and get that information from has been difficult.
That's really interesting, actually, not having run for public office, thinking of it from a little bit different perspective, where going into Washington after college, I never really thought that my gender had anything to do with my political ideology, although over the years I have grown to see that it does. I think that you begin to realize that politics is personal, but not the way radical feminists would have you believe, in which the personal is political. I don't believe that every decision you make is part of a larger political ideology. I simply believe that if we are going to talk to women, we need to actually talk in a personal and emotional way that resonates with their lives. So thinking, as I've gotten older and I'm a wife and I'm a mother and I have other identities outside of the professional space, my gender then has definitely informed the way I think about things like healthcare or education or the workplace. So, but I certainly don't think one has to inform the other.
We just have to push harder, I think. That's what I noticed. Just having to push harder against the stereotypes and against the folks that are entrenched. That's probably the best word to say. Not a lot of openings in that realm, so.
What do you think is the greatest obstacle facing women in conservative political spaces?
Sure. So as the head of a conservative women's organization, I am frequently met with the question, why do we need a women's organization? We all believe in limited government. We don't really get why we need an IWF. And what the right really doesn't understand, and few are coming around to it now, they don't believe deeply in gender differences. And it's sort of ironic. I think conservatives generally believe that men and women, boys and girls are different. And you all are very young, but I have 3 children, 2 are girls and 1's a boy, and I can tell you without sort of any hesitation that they are very different. They all play with dolls, and my girls will sort of cradle them and feed them the whole bit. And my son will put it on the front of his little bike, and he will scoot around the cul-de-sac as fast as he can until the doll falls off and hits its head. And I think they are different, right? One is nurturing and one is sort of a speed demon. But when it comes to politics, conservatives and by extension Republicans seem to forget these gender differences, right? And they think, well, we all care about healthcare and we all care about education, therefore we can just talk about budget deficits and everyone will get on board. But the reality is that that's the message that works with my husband or with some of you in this room may not resonate with me or with you ladies at the table. And what's interesting is that on the other side, progressives and Democrats have thought long and hard about gender and about gender differences. And in everyday life, they actually would like to see gender differences disappear, right? If we had a boy on the box of the Easy Bake Oven, everything would be right. And if girls stopped playing with princesses, everything would be right. They want to see parity in all walks of life. But when it comes to politics, they think very seriously about gender differences. They have invested tremendous resources in figuring out, how to speak to women. And I think for conservatives, we simply haven't gotten there yet. And I will sort of continue preaching that until the right really catches on. But it's an uphill climb.
I would just echo that. A lot of it has to do with messaging, how we frame something when we're speaking to women versus how we frame something when we're speaking to men. And then, by the way, how we frame it when we're speaking to a young woman versus a woman who's married and has, several kids is different as well. I had an instance where I was talking to a gentleman and he was saying, we need to be talking about limited government. We need to be talking about, the Second Amendment. And I said, okay, you knocked on the door and you talked about limited government and Second Amendment rights, and this woman just lost her job and she has 2 kids to feed. I knocked on her door and I started talking about helping her get back on her feet. I got her vote and you didn't. And it was just eye-opening for him and for everyone else at the table. Like, oh, I need to speak to the issues that really matter to this woman or to this family, not just speaking to the gender per se or speaking to the issue of the day, which at that point was Second Amendment, speaking to the person and saying, how can I make their life whole and how can I make their life better?
So true, and I would just add really quickly that we did some research last year about what women really want in the workplace, and I think something that came out of that, and it's so easy when we're talking in politics to talk about sort of large demographics, right? Women, African Americans, Latinos, sort of as if we all fit sort of neatly into some kind of square, right? And the research was really fascinating because what we found is that, not surprisingly, all women do not want or need the same thing in the workplace. There were some really stark divisions between mothers and non-mothers, as we may expect as your needs and preferences change. But there were also very distinct differences between self-identified progressive women want in the workplace and self-identified conservatives want in the workplace. So something like having a female supervisor. We hear a lot about the need for female role models and female managers in the workplace, but it was interesting when we looked at the research, it was progressive women who really wanted that, and they actually valued it at a certain sort of salary. They were willing to make a trade-off to have that. Well, conservative women just weren't as concerned with that. They were more concerned with what we might call the soft features of that work environment, an employee tenure, for instance. Is it a stable environment? Is this a place that people will stay? And I think really sort of recognizing that not only are men and women different, but within women, we are a large and diverse 54% of the voting population.
So the GOP's war on women has been a contentious topic in past elections. Do you think this term captures the relationship of the Republican Party with women voters?
Gosh, I would say that it's very representative of what's going on right now. And I say that just tentatively because I don't believe that necessarily Trump embodies what the party in and of itself thinks about women per se. But I do think, just from my own experiences, that we're still very much behind and there's work to be done. So we're constantly, evolving and we're moving forward and making good progress. But in order to say that we're a welcoming party and we're a party that says, women, there's opportunity for you, and especially being an African American woman, there's opportunity for you, there's still just so much to be done.
You put that so nicely, and I certainly think that the conversation has changed this year. I think that in 2012, the war on women narrative played handsomely for the left, but then in the 2014 midterms, we saw that gender gap close to about 5 points. That was sizable, and it was in many states, like Colorado, we saw that many Democrats actually overplayed their hand on the war on women, and I think people were thinking about things that really mattered to them, and it was becoming a little bit fantastical to think that one political party was openly hostile to more than 50% of the population. I think it just didn't quite resonate enough. That being said, I think we have seen the war on women narrative shift. So while it had been focused on reproductive rights the last couple of election cycles, the new front, so to speak, is the workplace. And so now, and you will hear much about this next week, it's Equal Pay Day on Tuesday. There's now sort of a near obsession over pay equality and paid leave and childcare subsidies and workplace regulations and mandating minimum wage hikes, things of that nature, all in the name of, quote, protecting women. And I think we have to be careful to think about the economic impact of such efforts. And then also to think about how we can actually help women. I don't think that giving people freedom of choice over the most important things in their life, like their health care or like their education, is a war on women. I think it's just the opposite.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, thank you for bringing up that point about Colorado. We had a very difficult and colorful Senate race where we, as the Republicans, were looking to replace the incumbent Senator Mark Udall, and it really did become about reproductive rights, and that was supposedly the war on women front, and it just kept playing over and over and over, and what we found were women were tired of it. We wanted to know about things like pay, equal pay. We wanted to know about national security. We wanted to know about, economic development and advancement for women. We didn't really want to hear about reproductive rights. And it's not that they don't matter, it's just the focus on it is not, it doesn't hold such a prominent place in a lot of people's, in their space anymore. And so now the conversation gets to advance beyond that. And women are seen as being broader and more diverse than just this one issue. And I think that oftentimes, at least in previous cycles, separated Democrats from Republicans when you're talking about the social issues. But once you move away from that as the prominent point and you start looking at these other things that really encompass women, then you start to see that there's more involved than just that one issue, and then where can we find some agreement on some of these other issues.
And to the point about agreement, I think there has been a reluctancy on the right and Republican side to come to the table on issues related to women. And I think that there has been, for years, and I can say this from my position at IWF, we have spent years pushing back on what we would call the faulty wage gap statistic, and we have been sort of aggressive out there and trying to set the record straight. But the reality is there are women who face challenges, there are women who fall through the cracks, and we don't want to have a go-it-alone society where people, where young people come out of college and feel that somehow maybe they're being discriminated against. We want people to know that they have recourse. We want people to know that they have choices. We have a big project being released next week called Working for Women. It's a modern agenda for working women that tries to address these concerns, right? There's more that we can do. We can say, hey, the numbers you're using are wrong. But we can also say, hey, there's ways that we can tighten up the Equal Pay Act to make sure that women have recourse when they need it. We can set up personal care accounts so that people can save for time off. We can make sure that we're offering tax incentives for small businesses so that they can be better equipped to provide time off for parents caring for children or for aging parents, things of that nature. So there are things that we can do, and I think that has taken some work to get the right to realize that it's not enough to just say, hey, your numbers are wrong, we have to come to the table with something.
According to the journalist Rebecca Traister, single American women are becoming an increasingly powerful political force, one that will play an enormous role in upcoming elections. However, this demographic is also overwhelmingly liberal or progressive. For example, 67% of unmarried women in 2012 voted for Obama compared to 31% for Romney. Why do you think it is that single women are flocking to liberal politics, and what do you see as the long-term impacts of this phenomenon?
Well, I love this question because it's something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I think a lot of people, especially I would imagine younger women, are wondering when did women become sort of assumed to be progressive or assumed to be more liberal, and when did this war on women and sort of woman as victim mantra take hold? Because there was a time not that long ago when actually many young women were conservative, and closer to when I guess I was in college. And the answer is that this did not happen overnight. Some of you may be familiar with Robert Putnam, and he wrote this book, Bowling Alone. There was a sense that many people had become sort of disconnected from traditional social networks. And there were a number of political scientists at the turn of the millennium who were sort of trying to figure out what it is that makes voters tick. What gets people to the voting booth. There was clearly no longer those institutions that used to exist, sort of in a traditional sense of the word. And so there were some academics that you may be familiar with, Don Green and Alan Gerber out of Yale, who wanted to go out and sort of figure out what is motivating people. And they joined forces with the League of Women Voters in Connecticut, a small chapter of the League of Women Voters. And they conducted one of the first sort of real on-the-ground experiments in political science. And they had, so they randomly assigned a pool of Connecticut voters into 3 conditions. They had one group that received a robocall, one group that received a piece of mail, and one group that received a door knock. And the final group, the placebo group or the control group, received nothing at all. And what they learned was pretty shocking, that the door knock, as you were mentioning earlier, you were door knocking, increased voter turnout by more than 8 points. So that was actually a very sizable increase of voter turnout, and it was interesting in and of itself. But it opened up this sort of intense research. I think a lot of political consultants started hey, that's really interesting. And it sort of opened up this flurry of research, and much of it started to be led by the women's groups, and because it was so focused originally on women. So you had this proliferation of women's groups on the left, from NOW, and the American Association of University Women, and the National Women's Law Center, and Women's Voices, Women Vote, and it goes on and on. There are truly dozens of women's groups on the left, and I tell donors that all the time. I'm like, and then there's IWF, sort of the only group on the right. And so I think that it has taken sort of a decade and a half for progressives and for Democrats to really invest heavily. I mean, Emily's List raised $52 million in the 2012 election. That is comparable to what Karl Rove and American Crossroads raised. I think it was 54 million. So the left then saw this opportunity. They invested heavily. They created lots of organizations, and they focused really intensely on how to get those women voters, and they were extremely successful at it. So if you're a conservative and you have money to spend, please send it to IWF.org.
So I think I would take a little bit different approach. I think going back, I guess historically, when we look at conservative politics and conservative families and the breakdown, when you look at the way that the families were set up and how the women felt like their place was back then, and how that's evolved to now, and how we see more women stepping up and taking leadership roles, I think for Republicans, or conservatives as you would say, I think it's just been a slower transition. And the best example that I can really think of in modern times, hopefully you guys will remember, was when Sandra Bland, or was it Sandra, what was her name?
Oh,
Fluke.
Yeah.
Fluke.
Yeah, right.
Sandra, I think it was Fluke.
You probably don't even know who she was. You guys are so young. Like 3 years ago.
She was She was testifying in front of Congress. And so there she was behind this table all by herself. And then she was testifying in front of all of these middle-aged and older, Caucasian males. And when the camera panned, and all you saw were all these men, and then it flashed back, and then you saw this one, young lady sitting by herself. It was kind of the eye-opening moment. Like, that's when the war on women started, or at least the perception. And when you looked at that and you thought to yourself, wow, why couldn't they have any women on this panel that she was testifying in front of? And I think that narrative has been played masterfully by the media and by others who use it to propel that narrative of the war on women, but not necessarily. I just don't think for us that that's really representative. And I think women, they looked at that and they said, you want to take my choice away. Here's the party of choice, Republican Party of choice. Here's the party of freedom, individual rights, and liberty. Everything that really made me come to be a Republican. And then here it was, you're looking at this young lady like you're trying to take her choice away. And so when other young women coming up saw that, and they think about how there's a panel of men who want to take away a young woman's choice, I think that begins to start that snowball effect, and then you see more women, young women, starting to go over to the more progressive or liberal side.
And then there was Todd Aiken.
Right. Insert foot into mouth. If I never hear another comment by a man saying something crazy about a woman, you can't have kids, the bare aspirin between the legs, I mean, all this stuff that I'm just scratching my head going, okay, we don't do that anymore. We also don't churn butter anymore either. So
I would just
let's
add
move forward.
that while it's really easy to sort of say, oh, look at all these, stupid comments that conservative white men have made. If any of you have read Leslie Sanchez's book, You've Come a Long Way, Maybe, she outlined some pretty damning moments by Democrats and progressives towards women. And I think it's worth noting that neither party actually cares more about women than the other. It's that one party has been far more skilled and thoughtful in its investment of resources and how it's going to mobilize the electorate and all of this. But there's some pretty awful stuff that has happened on both sides of the aisle, and I think it's one doesn't make the other correct, of course, but it sort of puts it into perspective. It's bad players everywhere.
To ask a quick follow-up question, would you attribute the way the GOP is portrayed to young women more to media perception over policy matters?
I'd almost say it's probably more weighted towards the media perception, just because we're in such an advanced age, and so news and comments and everything that's said and done is instantaneously tweeted or Facebooked out. So in that respect, I would say more of the media, but then also policy. When I was making a comment about the GOP not taking a longer time to catch up and taking a longer time to really make policies that were more in tune with the times, I think that's probably where we'd see like the lag per se.
That's exactly right. I would say that I think the right has started to move in the right direction. I think on the ground there has been a proliferation of conservative women's groups who are doing different things, from grassroots to social media to seeking out and helping fund women candidates who are running at the state and national level. So there has been much more of an effort. So there's a lot of women who are bothered by this and who do recognize that ultimately conservatism to them means limited government, it means liberty, it means personal responsibility, it means being able to pursue that vision of happiness that suits you and your family. And so I think it's been frustrating, and I think in the political side, there are a lot of great Republican women out there. I mean, we are sort of fortunate to have someone like Kathy McMorris Rogers chairing the House Conference and messaging, and we have people like Marsha Blackburn and Virginia Fox and Elise Stefanik, and there's a lot of them, and very bright women who come from all sorts of different backgrounds who are doing great things to try to change the conversation. And to their credit, there is a growing cadre of male Republican lawmakers who are also recognizing the importance of being able and being equipped to talk on these issues. They get stumped every time. They're terrified to talk about the wage gap. Don't be so terrified. Just learn the facts. Think about it for a little bit. Let it marinate. Don't go out there cold. But don't be so scared. You have to engage on these issues. Otherwise, you're going to seem like that kind of cranky old man in the corner.
It probably goes back to what's important for today, or what's important for the United States, or what's important in your community. We were talking earlier about messaging and what might be important. I'm a social conservative, but you know what? That's not the highest priority on my list. I don't spend a lot of time talking to people about abortion or reproductive rights. I just don't, because that's not my number one issue. I'm also the mother of a 20-year-old son, and he's draftable. So if something goes down in the United States or abroad and we reinstitute the draft, then my son could be drafted. So national security is actually higher on my priority list than abortion or anything else, which sounds odd saying you're a social conservative, but that doesn't rank as high on your list as national security does.
What is your current take on the state of American politics, and do you think our government is adequately representing women voters?
Such a bad election year. It's a little good to say.
Let's go back another
I
step.
know. It was a little bit depressing. It's interesting, the Pew Research Center recently had a survey that found that only 19% of Americans said that they trust government to have their best interest in mind. That's a very low number. That is probably, when you think about sort of the interviewer effect and all that, I suspect it's actually lower, right? Probably not even 19%. I think that we are seeing a tremendous amount of frustration, a tremendous amount of anger, obviously. There are a lot of people who feel like they have been left out in some way, or they have been taken advantage of. While there are people who love Obamacare, there are millions who hate it, right? There are millions who have seen their premiums go up. While there are some cities that have been fortunate to have sort of educational freedom, there are many people who are trapped in failing schools with no recourse. And I think sort of some of the discussions, for instance, over equal pay, they're not coming out of thin air. I mean, the reality is it's very expensive. Most people have to have two people working in their family. I remember another Pew study a couple of years ago that said that if they had the choice, only about 23% of women would choose to work full-time, because it's hard. It's hard to have a family, to work full-time, and to manage your household and everything else. And so many women would like to have that flexibility, but they simply can't afford to do that. And so I think all of that has been percolating. And there has been a sense of politics as usual. All of the war on women narrative the last few years has presented this image, I think, to many voters that Washington actually doesn't care about you. They care about inflammatory rhetoric. They care about winning elections, but they don't actually care about advancing policies that are going to help you. And so I think that is tremendously concerning. I think it's not surprising then when you look at someone like Donald Trump on the right and Bernie Sanders on the left that we have these sort of anti-establishment candidates. The question is, how will the right navigate this, and will they, one way or the other, sort of heed the concerns of both factions within the party?
I would just add to that, we're in a rough state in politics right now. I see warring between the factions on both sides. If you're on the left, you feel like maybe there's a group of folks that think the president's policies are working and they're good and you want to see that continued. If you're further left and you want radical change, and so Bernie Sanders is your guy. On the right side, what we're seeing is just this total anti-establishment. We're angry, you don't listen, we're grassroots. What about us at the bottom? And then you have a faction that just wants to retain power. And there are those of us who are looking at all this in the center, and we're thinking, where's the space for us? Like, what happened to we the people? And I think the we the people that are in the middle are really trying to fight and have that voice and bring that voice forward. I don't feel like that the folks are currently representing or representative of what I need, really of me. And it's not to say that I would push one issue over another. It's just where I am in my life, being an African American woman, being a mother, being a small business owner. Do I have a government that represents that? What about those interests? And I don't feel like I have a government that is representative of that. And I know that there are lots of women in my circle who feel the exact same way. Even though they might be polar opposites, they still feel like there's no representation for their voice.
I think we've gotten to a very bad place when we think about women as this woman as victim narrative has taken hold, and I think a lot of women have sort of bought into it. For me, when I look out at America, I think that this is truly the land of opportunity, and that we all are going to make choices, and with every choice is a trade-off. And we were joking at dinner before this that we made choices when 22, 23, 24 that maybe I would have done differently, but those are things that you figure out later. But that doesn't mean that the cards were stacked against me. That doesn't mean that sexism was lurking around every corner. That doesn't mean that the workplace is hostile toward me or doesn't want me to be out there working. It just means that life has choices, life can be difficult, and that you sometimes have to stop and reassess. But I think that the fact that we have gotten to a place where we have created this the victim mantra and that it's taken hold should tell us something, because it means that a lot of people are hurting, a lot of people are feeling the pinch, and they're willing to take that sort of identity on as victim.
So a follow-up question to that, do you think the current faces of conservative politics, like Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, are helping lessen the appeal of conservative politics for young women?
I think the comments are what lessen the appeal. I don't think that you can say certain things about women or women's faces or their bodies, or you can make inferences like that without having an effect. Certainly, there's just a difference, I think, on how we speak to one another, whether it's to women to women, or men to women. I think that some things just don't need to be said. And I'm very careful when I talk to people, and I'm thinking to myself, is that the appropriate thing to say? Is that the right thing to say? How do you influence, or how does that make that other person feel when you say certain things? And understanding that there are gender differences, cultural differences, age differences, and being respectful and trying to be all-encompassing of those types of things when you say something. So, no.
Not helping.
Not helpful.
Not helpful. I mean, to be fair, of course, to the right, while they are being not helpful. It's interesting to look at sort of what's happening with the Clinton campaign, as she has really not appealed to a broad base of women the way that one would have anticipated. And I think it's especially interesting to see how she has not appealed to young women. So while the right has its own set of problems, the left is also running up against sort of a wall in terms of what women want to hear. And I think that the woman is victim mantra may be growing stale among some people, especially as they come out and say, well, I have all of these opportunities and I have all of these choices. Maybe this sounds a little old and a little sort of outside the realm of reality. But both parties are not current. Is that the right way to put it? They're not keeping up with the marketplace.
All right, please join me in giving a round of applause to our speakers. All right, so we have time for a couple questions, if anyone has any questions.
Hands going in.
Okay. So you talked a little bit about the disconnect between the Trump voting faction of the Republican Party and the establishment elites. And I was wondering if you think that disconnect sort of extends to the different factions of the Republican Party's attitudes towards women, and whether like the base or in the South or whatever has like a different attitude towards women, and whether and what that says about like this election and the future of the Republican Party.
So, just from my own experience, I didn't feel as much about it's you as a woman or you as a female candidate as much as I felt like it was about a certain group trying to hold on to power. So for them, it was about, having that grip on power versus, you're a woman and we just don't want to see you elected because you're a woman. Nationally, as I look out at the landscape, I don't think what's going on in the party now, it has nothing to do with women versus men. It has more so to do with the grassroots, I would say, versus the elites, or however you would term the establishment. So you see those two factions pulling. What's being lost, I think, is the message. How do we appeal to women? They're so busy fighting over the power and who should have the voice that women and minorities and young people, are getting lost and getting almost left out of the conversation. So this is going to be a tough cycle. You're going to see a lot if the convention ends up, if we end up going into a brokered convention or an open convention, you're going to see a lot of things happen within the Republican Party that is almost like a rebuilding of it, per se, in a lot of ways. And I think what comes out of it is then that voice to say, okay, we need to be thinking more about women's issues. We need to be thinking more about minorities. We need to be thinking more about our youth in the communities.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I think that the only thing I would add is that there is this sense that everybody in Washington, or everyone in this quote establishment is corrupt and self-serving. And there's a huge part of Washington that has devoted their careers to actually coming up with concrete policy solutions that would help Americans, right? And I think that that is what's being lost. And when you say that they're not thinking about the messaging anymore, they're not thinking about the policies, their messaging, they are so busy fighting that they are ignoring some of the tremendous work that has gone on entitlement reform or healthcare reform or labor regulations. All of this is years of work that people have put into actually thinking about positive steps forward. And right now we're not hearing about any of that. We're seeing people punch each other at political rallies, and it's all sort of disgusting.
My name is Michelle Goodwin. I'm the president of the Fairmont College Republicans. And I read Ann Coulter's book, Assault and Flattery, The Left's War on Women. And it feels as if it's a war on conservative women. And we see that specifically here on campus, where it's like you come out as a Republican and immediately the first question is, do you hate women? No, I am one. How do you feel like that stigma has impacted conservative women like yourselves? And you spoke a little bit earlier about young women. How do we combat that stigma, and how do you convince the left to stop attacking women and creating this ongoing war on women?
My answer to that is that you have to engage, right? And I think you're right. It is not sufficient for, if you're of the progressive feminist ilk, it's not good enough if you're running for office, if you're running as a Republican, or if you are working in politics that you are conservative. You're absolutely correct. But I do think that you have to just continue to be out there and to engage in a reasonable tone and in a reasonable way, and to push back on all sort of the absurdities that are often put out there by women's groups on the left. And I know many of them; they're lovely people, but I disagree deeply, with what they stand for. And I think it's good to remind people that women are not a homogenous demographic, right? There's women of all sorts of different political stripes and interests and preferences, and that's a wonderful thing, and we have to make sure that diversity really means diversity of opinion and ideas.
So I probably would take a little bit different approach. For me, I think it's really incumbent upon the party and party leaders and elected officials to make the party a more welcoming place. I think that they have a responsibility, whether they're a man or a woman who's elected, to reach out into organizations like yours or other organizations with young folks or minorities or whatever, to really say that this is a place where you are accepted and you are appreciated and you are wanted. And until we do that, I don't think that the stereotype goes away. I think the more that we try to run from it, we perpetuate it versus combating it. So the folks out there who are elected and who are, in leadership positions, they should be doing a lot of the heavy lifting on this. They should be the ones, whoever, is city council or county commissioner or, whoever it is, state senators, whoever it is, it's their job to reach back into the communities and to dispel that stereotype. I mean, we can do so much as we come together as a panel and as a group, but really when you think about what your elected officials should look like or how they should respond to you, it is incumbent upon them to do the heavy lifting on this.
What do you think the conservative movement GOP has done right in terms of
No more binders full of women, I know that. I think what we've done right is we've allowed women to have more of an influence on the messaging. So in previous cycles, what I've noticed is that women, it was like, we have issues, these are things that are important to us as mothers, workers, and it was sort of like, okay, we gotcha, we're over here. And now I see that movement to where there's folks in the party and leadership who have really allowed, people to come up and have a voice. And that sounds strange when you think about a party and you think about maybe an allowance, but really from where the party started and historically where we've come from, that's been what's going right. It's going in the right direction. So that movement, I would say, is what's right. It's slow, too slow for me, but it's moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and from the sort of movement perspective, I think that it's also very slow. But one thing that we're trying to do is to actually focus on not just preaching to the choir. It's great if there's women who agree with you. I hope there's some in this room tonight, but it's more important that we reach women who maybe, ought to agree with us, but hadn't really thought much about it, or maybe just hadn't ever been approached. And so I think engaging women and talking to them, we find that there's actually, women are very persuadable, not because they're fickle, but because very often they haven't been engaged on some of these critical issues. And some of our research has been very encouraging in the sense that Americans and American women very much want the same things. The question is, how do we get us to a place where we can be in agreement on some of these issues, and how can we talk to women about why we're concerned about government overreach in a way that doesn't turn them off. And I think there's plenty more opportunity for that, but that's an area that we're really focused on.
So you guys sort of present the Republican Party's electoral problems with minorities and purple women, and also to an extent as minorities. That's sort of an optics issue, a lot of it. Do you think that there are like substantive policy positions in the Republican Party that holds a platform that does not account for the needs of minorities and women, and do they need to shift? They need to make any big shifts over the next few years since
So I would say it's not just merely an optics issue, and if I gave that impression, that's incorrect. It is an issue of messaging to me. It is an issue of prioritizing. Yes, we need to shift. There was a time where you sort of had a litmus test. You had to be for a traditional marriage, you had to be pro-life, all the things that you had to be in order to sufficiently qualify yourself as a conservative Republican. And so I think now we're not shifting from our traditional values. I'm a social conservative, and that's not going to change. I'm, very much in line with that platform. But like I was saying earlier, it's not at the top of my priority list. So yes, we need to shift. We need to speak to what's important to me. We need to speak to what's important to you. If you're talking about not having a job when you graduate, we need to be speaking to that. If if we're talking about outrageous student loans and out of control debt, we need to be speaking to that. And so I think those are the shifts and the type of changes that we need to make in order to prepare ourselves for the future as a party. Not changing our message or our platform, it's just, what is important to people. Now, for some people, you'll get them, they'll be to the right of me and they'll say social issues are all I care about. And that's fine. But we're not living in just a social issues economy. We're not living in just a social issues nation, or global social setting. So we're not just living in one isolated issue arena. There are so many other things that we have to deal with, and I think being able to really look at the issues that are in front of us and what we're facing, that's what's going to be important going forward in the future. Terrorism is a big deal. People don't care if you're having an abortion. They care about your head being cut off or you being put in a cage and drowned. They care about other things versus just some of the things that we fought over in the past. So that's what I would change going forward for our future.
And I would say that actually I think it's almost entirely an optics issue. I think that if you actually dig down into what the Republican and conservative sort of platform is, these are things that are great for women, great for minorities. I think that giving people ownership and control over their healthcare dollars is something that would benefit everyone in this room. I think making sure that more people have educational or opportunities to choose the school that makes sense for their son or daughter is essential to living a healthy and successful life. I think not waging a war on online education, which opens up an entire other sort of avenues for people in terms of higher education, is something that's truly sort of liberating. I think that making sure that we eliminate any kind of barriers to entry into the workforce. These are truly conservative principles. And I don't see this as a war on women. I don't see this as a war on minorities. I see that this is giving people control and ownership over their lives, which I think we want. But I think the disaster has been that Republicans and conservatives haven't thought for a minute about how to talk about these issues. So when you tell students coming out of college with $100,000 in debt, like, oh well, that's not going to cut it. You have to figure out how to talk about these issues. People need to understand why the cost of tuition has gone up so high. They need to understand that when government subsidizes things like college tuition, colleges like Pomona have no interest in controlling costs. And guess what? The costs are passed on to you guys. And then what happens when you get out of school and we've raised the minimum wage? That means that wages all the way up go up. That means that businesses are saying, well, we don't really have the opportunity for you. You're graduating from a 4-year school with a great degree, and you're saying, I have $100,000 in debt and I can't get a job. To me, these are conservative values. These are the things that we need to now say, we have to figure out how to message this, because this is a disaster. And it's unfair to young people who are trying to enter the workforce and build a life for themselves.
I didn't catch your name on the speaker, right?
Oh, Sabrina.
Sabrina. First of all, thank you. It's very interesting. This question relates to something you repeated throughout the talk, which is this victim mantra that is my question is in regards to the fact that earlier in the speech and many times throughout your talk, you mentioned how women have choices and women can choose their ideology, can choose their what they do in the workplace and how they go about their lives. Why don't you regard this victim mantra, which others would just regard as feminist ideology, as one of the choices that women have made in terms of seeing the world in that way? Like, why is it that that's a brainwashing propaganda technique that women didn't choose, that they were just like kind of pushed into, as opposed to them choosing to look at the world that way?
Well, fair enough, and that's a really good question. And I think that, yes, you're right. We all choose in some way the way that we look at the world, right? And sometimes that's based on how we're raised or the information that's around us. So perhaps it's good to clarify, which is that I think that too often our lawmakers and the media reinforces this message that women are victims. And whether or not women choose to buy into that, I suppose is a choice. But so often the narrative is that our schools are not giving girls the same opportunities as boys. I remember when the president spoke about his daughters, who are at one of the most elite private schools in the entire country, and he said, I just hope, I'm paraphrasing, I hope that they have the same opportunities as their male classmates. And I thought, good Lord, I mean, you're spending like $40,000 a year on this school per child, and you're acting as if they're not going to have the same opportunities as the boys in their class. Tell that to a kid who's half a mile away from the White House, who has no choice in where they go to school. So I find that whole notion that because his daughters may like creative writing more than they like chemistry, that somehow the schools and society are working against them, and that they're going to be sort of swimming against this sexist current, which is just simply not the case. I think that men and women will make different choices, and sometimes, we're going to have great female engineers, and sometimes we're not. And that so often we don't look at all of the ways that women are succeeding, right? I mean, we may not know this, but that more than 50% of medical school graduates are women. 75% of veterinary school graduates are women. But if you look at MIT, presumably some of the smartest female math and science students in the country, their choices and what they're majoring in are different than the boys. It's kind of interesting. And they're going into the social sciences. They're going into architecture. They're not always going into engineering or computer science. And I think that's okay. I think we have to sort of accept that and not suggest that these differences between us somehow are indicative of a sexist culture.
not sure I really understand what you're asking. In terms of tradition, I don't think that America has a tradition of violence. I think that we have had a history or a historical past of violent episodes vis-a-vis slavery or other types of things, but I don't think that that's necessarily a tradition. So when I am referencing tradition, I'm just talking about where the family, the role of the family and the composition of the family. So that just, does that make sense? I'm looking at it from that perspective. It used to be where the family was a two-parent household, and that's no longer the case. Now the family is, comprised of a one-parent household, or maybe a grandparent is raising, a child, or perhaps there are different dynamics in the household situation. So those are differences in where we are from where we were traditionally, where the role of the family was traditionally.
Oh, well, I was asking, she used to work in the
Oh.
but I do go to your.
I thought it was you.
I thought it was me too, I'm like,
Oh, no,
you should clarify.
Yeah, we were just saying like about how, like, the world used to be, used to hold more tradition about just was asking for women, but now we have said past, obviously there were like social dynamics.
I have to admit, I don't remember exactly what I said, so I apologize, but I do think that there are, yes, gender differences have evolved, or I should say gender roles have evolved, very much in many ways for the better. It also, sometimes complicates things, right? It was, in many ways, it was a simpler time when you said, okay, well, you're in charge of the domestic sphere and you're in charge of the, professional sphere, and we all know sort of what our responsibilities are. Those gender roles were there sort of for a reason, right? And it kind of facilitated life. I think it's wonderful that those gender roles have evolved and changed and given women the opportunities that we have today. I suspect that as it has with my life, and I'm sure with Sherrie's life, it at times, means a little bit more juggling and a little bit more, sort of questioning of what we're doing every day and get up really early and I'm constantly frazzled. But I don't think that should, I don't think that that's a bad thing, and nor do I think that should mean that we can't have conservative values, because in many ways that independence that women have benefited from should make them want to have continued ownership and control over all of these other parts of their lives.
All right, I think we have time for a few more questions.
You talked specifically about choices, specifically about choices in majors and things in college, and you kind of see it as kind of a more individualistic thing, but do you simply discount the studies that show the bias that is inherent in classrooms, in education systems, and that are repeatedly shown? Or do you think that the left has somehow infiltrated the academy and scientific establishments to create these false studies or narratives?
I think that there is tremendous debate over some of this, right? Are gender differences biological? Are they socially constructed? Are they culturally influenced? There's some great books out there, and I think that all of the arguments have some credence to them. I think if anybody is sort of hurting in our educational system today, it is unfortunately young boys who are often, I think, have been sort of, in many ways we've asked boys and men in the workplace to sort of take a step back in order for girls and women to take a step forward. And I think that we want this not to be a zero-sum game, right? We want to grow the pie for everyone, and we want to make sure that everyone has equal opportunities. So I'm sure you're correct that there are instances where their bias exists, and I'm sure you're correct that there are bad educational environments. But on balance, I think that we are offering women, and girls and boys, and women and men equality under the law, and that's the most important thing. And how we choose to make use of that freedom may differ, and that's okay. We may regret some of our choices. I was joking at dinner that I sat next to some women at a restaurant yesterday, and they had all gone, you know, to Wharton Business School and different things, and I was thinking, I went into public policy, you know, like it's just very different. I love what I do, but you know, they probably make like 12 times what I make. So these are things that are important choices, and I think if we really want to help women, especially when we talk about things like the wage gap, it's important to sort of encourage women and men to think about the choices they're making early on. And of course, if you really think that there's some kind of bias that's happening in a particular environment, that we ought to have some recourse for that, and people should feel comfortable speaking up.
What would you say to women who are conservative and do identify as Republicans, but then look at the Republican presidential candidates, and for example, Donald Trump, who it is quite clear that he doesn't have as much respect for women, or even 4 years ago, Herman Cain and the alleged sexual assault cases, and they just don't feel, I think a lot of women just don't feel as welcome in the Republican Party. What would you say to them?
I would agree with that. I don't think I would dispute that at all. I was telling these ladies at dinner, I've had the opportunity to meet Donald Trump on 2 occasions, and this was well over a decade ago, and speak to him, ask him questions, find out, you know, it was during a time when he was doing real estate and I was involved in real estate, and so I was wondering about different things and just listening to him talk. I can tell you that Donald Trump today is no different than Donald Trump, you know, 10 years ago. He is the exact same, you know, kind of straightforward, brash. I'm going to tell you what I think, and I'm not going to say it nicely. That's the same way he was back then. For a conservative woman, I think we just have to keep pushing, and it's hard, especially for myself, coming off of a campaign where I'm seeing, you know, the sort of the pull for power, and that has nothing to do with my gender. Mostly it has to do with these, you know, factions trying to have control over the party. So for us, I think we have to hang on. For the Trump and all these other folks that are coming up now, the way I try to look at it is, had we not provided the space for a Trump to emerge, there would be no Trump. So had we been listening to the people at the grassroots level, we wouldn't see a Trump manifest as we have in this cycle. And I think that we're going to have to power through this. It's rough. This cycle it's not a good cycle to take as the representation for the Republican Party, just because we're having such internal conflict. We just have to hang on. And I know that sucks to hear because I hate saying it.
Particularly the population of males of color, of since the drug war against drugs began. Now that we're seeing that affect women as well. And I don't know what you might have to say about what they should us doing from a feminist perspective.
I would just say that, you know, times are changing, and the conversation that we're having around drugs today versus the conversation that we had, you know, 2 or 3 decades ago is completely different. I remember being in elementary school and receiving a little certificate signed by Nancy Reagan talking about, you know, no drugs or say no to drugs or whatever it was back then. In the movement that we've seen from Colorado, you know, we've just recently legalized marijuana, and so we've had those discussions regarding drugs and decriminalizing, you know, small amounts and things like that. There's work to be done, and now we're catching, I think, the entire, spectrum of criminal justice is working in the right direction. It's not going to help the people who, have already been incarcerated and released, and they've already had, records. There are things that we can do to reduce some of the stigmatism and reduce some of the sentencing and reduce some of the things that we do. In Colorado, our district attorney has put in place a really good program called Teen Court. So teens who get caught with minor amounts, they don't get the stigmatism and they don't get the hammer dropped on them for having, small amounts of marijuana. And trying to make sure that these folks, and not just teens, but adults too, are offered a diversion program so that they can go into this program, serve their sentence, whatever it is they need to do. It's not a sentence, but oftentimes it's classes that they have to take as part of the diversion program. And so then they're able to get away from having a record. I just got through graduating 4 women who were coming out of prostitution and human trafficking through a diversion program, and so now these girls don't have records that follow them and stigmatize them forever. So I think that's something that we're working towards. I know in Colorado, I know that we've done some things across the country in other areas, but I mean, there is a movement now to move government faster than it's ever moved before. And I'm excited for this possibility because everyone talks about how slow government moves. It does move slow, but yet right now we're moving very quickly. When things are brought to light about, decriminalizing marijuana, when things are brought to light about human trafficking, those types of things would have been unheard of. Not too long ago, these women would have been prostitutes, and now they're, they don't have that record behind them. Now they're able to apply for a job, and they don't have to disclose, oh, I did this. So there's movement there, and I'm excited about what's going forward and the possibility that we can have a chance to move the criminal justice system, not just with drugs or human trafficking, but other minor offenses as well. We can move it faster and give people a second chance, because I think that's what it's about.
I don't think I
I think we have time for one more question. So.
Yeah, I was wondering if just both of you could kind of describe your personal, your versions of feminism for us. Just kind of give a background about kind of what you define as feminism and how that kind of connects, or just what you find.
I think being a feminist is a wonderful thing. I believe deeply in equality under the law. I think myself as a modern feminist, as opposed to maybe a gender feminist, in which your gender sort of defines your ideology. For me, feminism is having the freedom to make the choices that suit me and my family. And as I was saying earlier, sometimes you're going to make great choices, sometimes you're going to make okay choices, sometimes you're going to make choices that you regret, but that's what freedom is all about. And I don't think that we should run away from that word. I think it's a wonderful thing that we have that freedom here in the United States. I think it's horrifying when you look around the world and you think about the kind of atrocities that so many girls and women face. And I think it's really essential that we feel confident in saying, of course I'm a feminist. Of course I believe in equality under the law. Of course I believe that girls and boys ought to have the same education. Of course I believe that women and men ought to be treated fairly and that women should feel comfortable going out and not being under attack. I joke about sort of sexism lurking around the corner, but the reality is that we live in a wonderful, safe, nurturing environment that sometimes has, rough patches, but I don't truly worry about my safety as a woman the way you would in other countries. And I think that's something that we should embrace, and conservatives should not be afraid to say that they're a feminist. You can say you don't believe in, Gloria Steinem or something, that's fine, but you are a feminist, I think. So.
I think I would probably define it more as, I would definitely say freedom is a part of it for me. I would also define it and say that opportunity is really where I see feminism play out for me. I don't want the bar moved when I get there. I don't want to have to work extra hard because of anything. I'm black, I'm a woman, I'm this, I'm that. You know, I want the bar to stay where it's at for me, for my male counterpart, for, you know, whoever is trying to attain that goal. So opportunity is definitely where I would see feminism play out for me. In politics, you look at things and it's almost like you want to say, oh, it's because I'm this, or oh, it's because you're that, when really it has nothing to do with gender or, you know, anything else. It could be something more to do with just what's going on externally. And so for me, I just want the opportunity. I mean, I could have gone to Wharton to get an MBA. I didn't want to work that hard. I went to another school to get an MBA, and you know, that's what it looks like for me. The opportunity was there. I could have worked hard. I could have went to Wharton or wherever and gotten my MBA from a, you know, an Ivy League school, but that was my choice. The opportunity was there. It was my choice not to try to go there. So that's how it shows up for me.
All right, thank you all for coming. Please give another round of applause for our speakers.